All right, it's physics reaction number 93, I think. And today we have, I think this is a high school, actually, I'm not sure what level this is, but it looks like some kind of demo or something, so let's check it out.
All right, have your homework out if you would, please. Books open to page 79. You did problem 6, B and C, and you did problem 9. Before we take a look at the homework, though, let's review some things we've talked about recently. We've talked a lot about stress. From a physics definition, what is stress? Kendall?
Oh, so this is a live classroom. Boy, this is such great framing. I wonder if this camera is in the way back and they're super zoomed? I know there's ways we could think about that optically, but okay, so there's actual students in this who we can't see, which is probably good. And we can, sounds like we can barely hear, but my guess is, he can hear. So the question is, who's the target audience for this? Is it for people who are absent? Is it for these students so that they can catch back up again? I'll be curious to see if he ever directly addresses the camera. Very interesting.
Deformative force per unit area, very good. Force per unit area is pressure. Deformative force per unit area we call stress. What about strain? We talked about that as well. What is strain, Michael?
It's like the stress you can see.
It's the result of stress generally. Depending on the rigidity of the solid. What is strain? If stress is the amount of deformative force per unit cross-sectional area, stress is what produces strain, but what is strain? The result of stress. But yeah, it's...
So I'm loving this, right? So this is actually a really tricky concept. And there's been times in my life when I thought this is just like, let's slap some more vocabulary words, than is needed for this interaction of forces on solid objects. But I'm really liking how he's facilitating this conversation. It's a little ping-pongy, right? Want him, then to a student, then him, then another student. It seems like he has a really good rapport with his students, so he's able to say, oh, come on, or whatever. But I'm really like this, especially that most recent thing he said, which is, well, this is the result of strain. And I think that he's asking the students to realize that that's not actually an answer. It's kind of a circular using one thing to define another thing. And when he's asking for their separate definitions, so I really like what's going on here.
Often true, usually true. Kendall? Okay, relative deformation. Relative deformation. Again, relative meaning not just how much deformation was there, but relative to what we had before. So if, the Inquisition came and got us all, they put Kendall on the rack and they put Michael on the rack, and they stretched Michael out 2 inches, he might actually be like, oh, that feels good on my spine. That feels good, decompression. And Kendall's like ripped asunder with those 2 inches, and that's the end of Kendall as we knew her, and it's just sad. Okay? And somehow Audrey got out of it. It's got to be nice being in the middle, right? It's like short, tall.
So I just want to pause and praise his sort of understanding of his audience, right? So I'm pretty sure this video is only a week old. So I'm guessing, so here it is in September. I'm guessing this is still the beginning of the year. He's already figured out, some of the boundaries of humor that are allowed. Obviously, he's probably taught here for a while, probably understands the culture of the school. But when you hear something like that, you are waiting for at least a few students to laugh, right? So if it doesn't happen, either the joke's flat, or occasionally you risk like, oh boy, that's uncomfortable. But it was really interesting watching his body language, his facial expressions. I think he knew he had them. I think he knew that it was a comfortable place to be, and I just think that's such a great thing already in September to have figured out.
I'm just in the middle. He doesn't pick on me. We'll think of something for you. Believe me. I've actually got the perfect thing coming up here in just a minute. We got this. We got Audrey. She's going down, literally. All right. As we talked about stress and strain, we said stress and strain are going to be proportional, just as stretch and tensile force are proportional, up to a point. There is a point at which the stretch and the stress and the strain, they're not proportional anymore. What do we call that maximum stress applied until the proportionality ceases to exist? Let's go back to Audrey. One might say this is the limit to which the proportionality can exist. The proportional limit. There we go.
That was so cool. You could how he really, it feels like this is the beginning of the class hour, or however long it is, and it's like, come on, we're just trying to get into a rhythm here. Come on, this is stuff we know. This is stuff that's in our notes, and so just that little trick that he used of just flipping the phrase around, and it worked so well. And I think that it made the students feel more comfortable. Like, oh, okay, hang on, wait, I got this. This is just straightforward stuff. He's not trying to trick me.
Not creative names here. Then we had another point at which additional stress would permanently deform the object. So up to this point, the object can still recover its original shape. Past this point, no recovery. Well, not full recovery is not possible. The elastic limit. Then we had another point at which maximum stress, or you're going to break that object. Ultimate tensile strength. So you on the rack, right? What is the ultimate tensile strength? The maximum force before bad day. Shouldn't joke about that. That was a pretty awful time in history. And then there was another point at which we had the maximum strain the object could sustain. The actual maximum amount of stretch relative to the original size before the object would just break. And that was called the breaking point. So again, the big difference, ultimate tensile strength class is the max stress. If you want to think of it, okay, we don't know the cross-sectional area of the object, but the maximum force that can be applied before, okay, it breaks, you put too much force on it. Versus, you didn't necessarily have too much force, but it was on there so long, it continued to slowly stretch the object.
So one of the interesting things that's going through my head, I don't think I've ever actually taught this material. I've read about it and used it, frankly. I don't know if I've ever taught it, but to me in my head, I have a graph in mind, right? Stress versus strain, or strain versus stress. I'm not sure who I'd put on the y-axis. And I'm imagining, the proportionality is a straight line. When the proportionality kind of breaks, it's kind of like it kinks, and then there's just like a stop point where the thing doesn't even exist anymore. And so I'm thinking about multiple representations, and because there's this thing in front of us, let me use my mouse here, whatever this is, this little, I'm thinking something's going to happen here. I can't imagine he's going to break something today. But it's possible, I suppose, that's just always set up in this class, but I'm hoping it's going to get used. There's the vocabulary, which is what he's been doing. There's the graphical thing that's kind of been running through my brain, and then there's some sort of physical representation. So I'm really excited about all of these mixes of representations.
The object couldn't handle it anymore, and the molecular attraction wasn't strong enough, and it went ahead and broke. That's the breaking point. That's the max strain the object can sustain.
So much to keep track of.
We talked about two types of stress so far. Two types of stress, Michael.
Longitudinal, lateral.
We didn't actually talk about mental stress because we don't believe in that. We believe God made you to handle. Okay, you can't actually get mentally stressed, but God did make you to handle the stresses that come in your life, right? God isn't going to put more on you than you're able to handle through His help, right? Now, it isn't true, by the way, that God's not going to put more on you than you can handle. He will put more on you than you by yourself can handle before.
So I'm guessing that means this is some sort of religious affiliated school. I think that this little tiny aside that he's doing it feels natural for his teaching style, right? It doesn't seem like he's breaking away from his typical relationship with his students. So I would assume that would be sort of the culture of the school.
Force you to rely upon Him, right? You think about things that Pastor Adam went through not that long ago, right? Without God's help, he doesn't make it through that situation. With your family, you've got some stresses, right? Through God's help, you're able to manage those. Without God's help, you might lose it, right? There's different things that God allows into your life to force dependence upon Him. And that's a good thing, right? We don't enjoy it, do we? we wouldn't pick it for ourselves, but if it teaches us to rely upon God and realize we can trust Him even through circumstances like that, it's still a good thing. But anyway, no, that wasn't what the question was asked.
So, fascinating, right? So that's not how my teaching has ever been. I've never been in a situation where that's been the culture or the rhythm that I'm in. But I just want to comment on the flexibility that he had there, right? So he asked the question about what are the two different types of stresses that and you heard me say longitudinal and lateral because that's what I was thinking of, right? Like getting a bar to actually shrink versus bend. And it sounds like the student said mental stress. And it was really, really interesting because his first statement was, well, come on, well, yeah, there's that, but that's not what we're talking about. But I think that he saw an opportunity to realize, well, my goodness, if I make it sound like mental stress is not a big deal, then, maybe the students might have a concern. So I think that really recognizing an opportunity with his audience, frankly, with his job, right? I thought that was really, it was an interesting tangent, but it was, I just liked how smooth it was.
Okay, we talked about, let me help you out here. One type of stress involved stretching or compressing. What do we call that? Well, it uses Young's modulus, but the name for that type of stress
More vocabulary.
Okay, there we go. Tensile stress. He's like, well, if you're going to give it to a girl, I'll go and answer it. All right, tensile stress. The other type would be, for instance, if this here is supporting very strongly, and then I started to pull down here. We've got the supporting.
Here's the other
here,
representations.
We've got me pulling here. So we've got opposing forces, but they're acting perpendicular to the length of the object. That would be called shear stress. So tensile stress and shear stress, the two types of stress that we looked at. Basically, one of your homework question, number 9, which we're going to get to here in just a moment, involved hitting a nail, right? Have you ever bent a nail? Hammering the nail and you didn't hit it squarely and nail bends, you're like, rip
every
the nail
single
off, start
time.
over. It's really frustrating, especially if there's other guys around who are watching, you want to look cool, like, yeah, I can hammer a nail too. And usually, the secret is instead of like trying to show off, just say, bam, and it's in. It's like tap, 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 get it set first, and then bam, and see if you can sink it with one blow. Girls, you ever hammered nails? You've bent nails before? Like, no, we're not like Michael. You've bent nail? Never bent nail? I'm not talking about these kind of nails. I'm talking like a metal nail with a hammer. Anyway, so hammering nail. That'd be an example of shear, isn't it? Right? Because whatever the board is, or maybe it's a wall, you're hammering a nail into the wall, or whatever, right? That's the supporting force, and then the hammer, if it doesn't hit squarely, it comes at an angle or it comes downward, right? That produces that deformation. I thought of this example, Audrey. Okay, you've seen the cartoons, Bugs Bunny cartoons, right? Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote, right? Inevitably, there's always a cliff somewhere in there. And let's say now it's Audrey, and she comes to the edge of the cliff, and you see the one with Yosemite Sam, it's like, or maybe it's Elmer Fudd, one of them going to blast that wabbit or whatever, and I was like, get across that line, get across that line, get across that line. It crosses the line, falls over the edge of the cliff. Well, this time it's Audrey, and she knows no fear, so she falls over the edge of the cliff, but inevitably, what is jutting out of the side of the cliff just for Audrey? Tree branch.
That was quite a bit of setup, but it's an interesting example. I really like what he's doing here, right? So there's tons of examples in life of these different types of stresses and strains and shear, tensile, all of that stuff. And so finding ways to get it involved with what the students have experience with. It was interesting, right? Because when the students were thinking of fingernails, I think he could have stuck with that, right? Because there's all kinds of painful things you can do with your fingernails that have to do with, I guess it would be shear stress at that point. I think that it's also interesting when you think about the nail example. If you actually hit it square, is that doing tensile stress on it, or are you just poking it through the wood? Because let's say you did that on a piece of steel or something, and so the nail can't go through. Well, then you're just crushing it, right? But the much more common thing is that it kind of pierces the wood, and you're doing damage to the wood, and then so that's I think why he went to the notion of bending a nail, because that's not what was meant to happen, and it only can happen with opposing forces. I really appreciated that, right? So the nail has to be stuck into the board or the wall or something, so that thing is providing is basically the opposing force. So when the hammer comes in sideways, there's two opposing forces, and bam, the result is a bend. I thought that was really, really great. Just staring at the time, I'm probably going to call it there. I thought this was a really interesting kind of, essentially a vocabulary review, getting them ready for some new material. And I think that he did use his physical setup there, and it sounds like they're sort of comparing to or getting ready for some homework problems, and I thought that was really, really great. I also thought watching his rapport with his students and understanding, where the humor boundaries were, and also that the whole mental stress thing that he did, I thought it was just very nimble. So great. All right, everybody, I hope you have a great day. And remember, physics teachers are awesome.